Amsterdam, Netherlands, October 1971. The city was drowning in its own atmosphere. A persistent, freezing rain fell from a gray sky, turning the cobblestone streets of the De Pijp district into slick, reflective mirrors. The canals smelled of diesel fuel, wet earth, and distant history. But beneath the charming facade of the bridges and the narrow canal houses, beneath the tourist brochures and the quiet cafes, Amsterdam hid a brutal, underground heartbeat. It was a city of extreme contrasts, where progressive politics met ruthless street violence, where artists painted masterpieces, while dock workers settled disputes with knives and broken bottles in the alleys behind the brown cafes. And in the autumn of 1971, the city's most violent secret was a woman. They called her the Dutch Colossus. Her real name was rarely spoken aloud in the circles that mattered, but her reputation was a relentless shadow that fell over every fight gym, every basement dojo, and every illegal gambling den in the Netherlands. She was a kickboxing champion, but that term felt entirely inadequate to describe what she was. She was a force of nature compressed into human form. Standing 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighing exactly 240 pounds, she was built with the dense, terrifying musculature of a heavyweight powerlifter. Yet she moved with the agility of a middleweight. Her fighting style was a savage, uncompromising blend of Western boxing and Muay Thai, refined in the gritty gyms of Rotterdam and Amsterdam. She didn't just fight men, she systematically destroyed them. In an era where female fighters were expected to be nimble and technical, the Dutch Colossus was a battering ram. She had ended the careers of over 15 male professional fighters. She broke ribs, shattered orbital bones, and ruptured eardrums. Local gambling syndicates made fortunes on her matches because the outcome was never in doubt. She was the undisputed queen of the European underground, a woman who had turned the physics of combat into a joke by proving that absolute, overwhelming power could crush any amount of technique. By the time Bruce Lee arrived in Amsterdam, she had grown bored. She was 32 years old, undefeated, and actively looking for someone, anyone, who could make her feel like she was in a real fight. Bruce Lee was in Amsterdam for a completely different reason. He was transitioning. The Green Hornet television series was behind him, and he was deep into the development of his own philosophy, Jeet Kune Do. He was traveling through Europe, meeting with martial artists, studying different fighting systems, and looking for the blind spots in his own understanding. He had heard the rumors about the Dutch Colossus from a journalist in London. The journalist had laughed when telling the story, describing a giant woman who beat men into submission. Most people dismissed it as a carnival act. Bruce Lee did not. He heard the underlying truth in the description, a fighter who relied on absolute weight and momentum. To Bruce, that wasn't a circus trick. It was a specific martial problem that required a specific solution. On a rainy Tuesday night, Bruce found himself standing in a damp, unheated warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air inside was thick with the smell of sweat, liniment, and cheap tobacco. A makeshift ring, constructed from heavy shipping pallets and thick ropes, sat under a single, flickering industrial bulb. About 50 people were crowded into the space. Dock workers, bikers, and hardened gamblers. They were smoking, drinking, and speaking in rapid Dutch, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. In the center of that grim room, hitting a heavy leather bag with the force of a swinging sledgehammer, was the Dutch Colossus. The sound of her shins connecting with the leather was deafening, a rhythmic, sickening thud that echoed off the concrete walls. She wore black kickboxing shorts, a tight sports bra, and hand wraps. Her shoulders were broad, her legs like tree trunks. Every time she kicked, the heavy bag swung wildly, its chains groaning under the immense stress. She was a terrifying spectacle of raw, unrefined power. Bruce stood near the door, observing. He wore his simple black training gear, his hands tucked into his pocket. He didn't look like a fighter. He looked small, lean, almost fragile against the backdrop of the brutal warehouse. He watched her for 20 minutes, analyzing the mechanics of her power. He saw the telegraph in her hips before she threw a punch. He saw the shift in her weight before she unleashed a low kick. He saw a fighter who had never been forced to be subtle because her power had always been enough to mask her technical flaws. Eventually, the Colossus stopped. She turned around, wiping sweat from her forehead, and noticed the small Asian man standing by the door. A silence fell over the warehouse. The promoter, a large man with a scarred face, walked over to Bruce. "You are lost, little man," the promoter said in broken English. "This is not a tourist attraction." "I am not a tourist," Bruce replied, his voice quiet but perfectly clear in the silent room. "I heard there is a champion here, a fighter who cannot be beaten." The promoter smirked, looking back at the giant woman. "You heard right. She is the best in Europe, maybe the world. I would like to test that," Bruce said simply. The warehouse erupted in laughter. It was a harsh, mocking sound. Men elbowed each other, pointing at Bruce. The Colossus herself walked over, her heavy footsteps vibrating the wooden floor. She looked down at Bruce, her expression a mixture of amusement and pity. She spoke in heavily accented English. "You? You are the movie actor from Hong Kong? The one who dances on television?" She laughed, a deep, booming sound. "I break men twice your size for breakfast. Go home before you get hurt." Bruce didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He just looked up at her, his dark eyes completely devoid of fear. "Dancing is for the screen. Fighting is for the ring. You have power. I want to feel it. Step into the ring." The laughter died down. The tone in the room shifted. The Dutch Colossus stared at Bruce, searching for a bluff, a sign of weakness. She saw nothing but absolute, unsettling calm. She had faced tough men before, men who tried to hide their fear with bravado. This man wasn't hiding anything. He simply didn't possess the fear she was looking for. "Fine," she shrugged, turning away. "Your funeral." They climbed into the makeshift ring. The contrast was visually staggering, almost absurd. The Colossus stood like a statue of war, her massive frame blocking out the single overhead light, casting a shadow over Bruce. Bruce stood across from her, his stance loose, his hands open at his sides. The referee, an old boxer with a crooked nose, stepped between them. "No rules," the referee grunted. "Fight until one cannot stand or yields. Protect yourself at all times." He stepped back. "Fight." The Colossus didn't waste time with testing. She lunged forward immediately, throwing a straight right hand aimed directly at Bruce's face. It was a freight train of a punch, carrying 240 pounds of kinetic energy. If it landed, it would end the night, and possibly Bruce's career, in a fraction of a second. Time seemed to stretch for Bruce. He saw the punch coming not as a blur, but as a slow, predictable arc. He didn't step back. Stepping back would give her the distance to reset and throw kicks. Instead, he stepped forward, to the inside of her punching arm. His shoulder brushed past her bicep as the punch sailed harmlessly over his shoulder. He was now inside her guard, chest to chest, close enough to smell the liniment on her skin. The Colossus blinked. She had never been inside her own range before. No one had ever been brave enough or fast enough to step into her power. Before she could react, Bruce's right hand snapped out. Not a punch to the face, but a sharp, precise palm strike to her solar plexus. It wasn't meant to knock her out, it was meant to disrupt her breathing, to momentarily paralyze her diaphragm. She gasped, her eyes widening. It felt like a hot poker had been pressed into her chest. She instinctively tried to wrap her massive arms around him to use her weight for a clinch. But Bruce was already gone. He had slipped out of her reach like water sliding through a crack in a dam. He was back at a safe distance, standing perfectly still, his hands relaxed. "Again," Bruce said softly. The Colossus's embarrassment turned to rage. She was a killer, a machine of destruction, and this small man had just stepped inside her best punch and touched her chest like she was a sparring dummy. She roared, a primal sound of pure aggression, and unleashed a devastating low kick. Her shin, conditioned for years to be harder than wood, whipped upward, aiming to shatter Bruce's lead thigh. Bruce didn't block it. Blocking a kick from a 240-pound fighter with a standard check would still transfer massive shockwave energy up his leg, potentially breaking his own block. Instead, he used his footwork. As her leg came up, Bruce pivoted on his lead foot, his body turning a precise 45 degrees. Her shin missed his thigh by a millimeter, slicing through the empty air where his leg had been a fraction of a second prior. The momentum of the missed kick caused her to spin slightly off balance. In that exact millisecond of imbalance, Bruce struck. He stepped forward, his lead hand slapping down on her kicking leg to control it, while his rear hand fired a straight punch. It stopped exactly 1 inch from her jaw. The wind from the punch brushed against her skin. She froze. She felt the kinetic energy of that near miss. She knew, with absolute certainty, that if he hadn't stopped, her jaw would have been broken into pieces. She pulled her leg back, stumbling slightly, her chest heaving. The warehouse was dead silent. 50 hardened criminals and fighters were staring in utter disbelief. The Colossus was being toyed with. For the next 2 minutes, Bruce Lee dismantled her psychologically. He didn't throw combinations. He didn't try to knock her out. He simply proved that she could not touch him. Every punch she threw hit empty air. Every kick she launched was evaded by inches. He moved like a phantom, always just outside her reach. And then, suddenly, terrifyingly, right inside her guard, tapping her ribs, her shoulder, her throat, and then vanishing again before she could react. He was teaching her a lesson in real time. He was showing her that brute force, without the framework of absolute efficiency, without the economy of motion, was just wasted energy. He was showing her that for all her weight and power, she was fighting in 2 dimensions, while he was fighting in 3. The Colossus was exhausted. Not physically, she had the stamina of a marathon runner, but mentally. She had never experienced this. Every fighter she had ever faced had eventually crumbled under her pressure. They had backed away, they had covered up, they had surrendered to her dominance. This man didn't surrender. He didn't even fight back in the way she understood. He simply occupied the space around her, making her look foolish, slow, and archaic. She stopped in the middle of the ring, her massive fists lowered, her chest heaving up and down. She looked at Bruce, and the rage was gone. In its place was a profound, humbling confusion. She shook her head slowly. "I can't touch you," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I have nothing left." Bruce stopped his movement. He lowered his hands completely, standing unarmed and unguarded in front of the 240-pound juggernaut. He looked at her with no arrogance, no triumph, only respect for the power she possessed, and pity for the limitations of her understanding. "You have everything," Bruce replied, his voice carrying clearly across the silent warehouse. "You have power that most men will never possess, but you use it like a hammer. If the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But what happens when the nail moves? You swing, and you only hit the air. You must learn to be water. When water meets a rock, it does not try to punch the rock. It flows around it. It finds the cracks. It wears it down. Your body is a rock. My style is water." The Dutch Colossus stood in the center of the ring, her massive shoulders slumping. She looked at her own hands, the hands that had broken bones and ended careers, and suddenly felt like she was holding them for the first time. She looked back at Bruce Lee, the small man who had just systematically dismantled her reality without taking a single hit, without throwing a single full-power strike. She bowed her head. It wasn't a mock bow or a gesture of defeat. It was a deep, respectful bow of a warrior who had just been awakened from a lifelong illusion. "Teach me," she said quietly. "I want to learn how to move." Bruce smiled, a warm, genuine expression that broke the tension in the cold warehouse. "We are always learning. The moment you stop being a student, you stop being a fighter. Come to Los Angeles next year. We will explore." Bruce Lee turned and climbed out of the ring. He walked back through the crowd of 50 silent men. They didn't laugh anymore. They didn't point. They parted like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. As Bruce reached the door and stepped out into the cold Amsterdam rain, the promoter looked at the giant woman still standing in the ring. "What just happened?" the promoter asked, his voice trembling slightly. The Dutch Colossus didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling the phantom touch of his near strikes on her skin, knowing that she had just witnessed the future of combat. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never look at a heavy bag or an opponent the same way again. Amsterdam, 1971. A city of canals and rain, hiding a moment of pure martial transcendence where a ghost proved that true power isn't measured in pounds, but in the absolute absence of wasted motion.